So one thing interesting about me is that I am super cheap. I don't like to spend money, especially when it's spending money on myself. But I'm just very thrifty. In fact, I got this shirt from the Village thrift store, and I know many of you shop there. But there's one thing that I do that's kind of quirky. If a new book comes out, I get all excited about the book. I take a little note in my phone and I write down the author and the name of the book, and I wait. I wait until it comes to the library, and then I read it for free. But the problem is that it takes sometimes a long time, especially when it's a bestseller or, whatever. So I waited a very long time to read the book 1000 Gifts by Anne Voskamp. And so it was probably a couple of years after it came out that I finally saw it at the library, and I grabbed it and started reading it. And the time that I had started reading it is about 3 months before my husband was diagnosed with severe osteoporosis and was hospitalized. And so the 3 months prior, it takes me a long time to read a book, and I keep renewing the book because I like to read them over again, or I like to read a sentence over again 3 times, and I take notes, and I literally take forever. So for 3 months, I think I had renewed it as many times as I'm allowed to renew it, and probably even renewed it under one of my other family members' names just so I can renew it again. But because I was studying this book, because it just saturated my heart and so many levels on who I am and how I deal with things. And so I was reading this book, and 3 months later, David was taken to the hospital. A crazy, weird incident happened where he was hospitalized. Nobody knew what was going on, and he was there for several weeks and undiagnosed. So that's a whole nother story in itself. But this book and Jesus helped prepare me for what I was about to be up against, and change the rhythm of my life even more so in a practice that I was sort of already doing but didn't realize it, and it allowed me to practice this rhythm even more. So, Anne Voskamp, if you get an opportunity to read this book, please read it. It's 1000 Gifts. It's a beautiful, beautiful written book. She's very poetic. We're talking about how Jesus is the bread of life, and Anne Voskamp refers to that in this book so often. She talks about when Jesus broke the bread at the Last Supper. He offered the cup, and he spoke a beautiful word. He said the word Eucharisteo, which is Greek for grace, thanks, and joy. So those 3 words are all within the word Eucharisteo: grace, thanks, joy. And she so eloquently just explains what this word means and how incredible, profound it is to remind us to give thanks in the storm. Because that's what Jesus did, remember? He knew he was going to be crucified, and he looked up, he gave thanks in the midst of the storm. And so what Anne is saying in this book, and what I am trying to encourage you all to do, is start this new rhythm in your life where you are literally practicing Eucharisteo, looking up in the middle of the storm, giving thanks, and remembering. Because remember, Eucharisteo means grace, thanks, and then joy. And so it's such a great story about my husband and I, and the journey that we've been on with his health. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go into that during this study. But what I have found during this time as I was practicing Eucharisteo, I found that through my recordings of giving thanks and praising in the midst of the storm, that the Lord provided joy and peace in the midst of it. One quick example is after the several weeks of him being hospitalized, the doctors had come to the conclusion that he had severe osteoporosis at the age of, I think he was 43 at the time. And, he's a man, and men his age aren't supposed to get osteoporosis. So it was a very strange diagnosis. But he would sneeze or he would cough and he would rupture or fracture or break something. And so he was a fragile man. And so when we brought him home, I had to get a hospital bed. And he had to use a cane, and he had to learn to walk again, basically, and do things on his own and get dressed on his own. And, he went into occupational therapy. And, he had a hard journey during this time. So I was finally able to bring him home. And 2 days later of him being home, in the middle of the night, he taps me and he says, "Call 911. I think I'm having a heart attack." Whew, I sprung out of that bed so quickly. I called 911, and actually I think he even dialed 911. And they came. It was literally in the middle of a blizzard. They were able to carefully get him into the ambulance, and off we went to the hospital. But as I was in the ambulance, I was looking outside the window, just watching the snow and driving. And the Lord reminded me of this new rhythm. And here I was in the midst of my husband possibly having a heart attack. And I was giving thanks. What? I was giving thanks because in that moment there was a storm. And what God reminded me of is to give thanks, to look up in the midst of the storm, give thanks, and then peace and joy will come. And so when we got to the hospital, we waited for many, many hours, and he laid there all doped up and attached to everything. And I sat there, and it was like 3 a.m. And I watched the clock go round and round and round, and I continued to give thanks. I actually thought I might be a widow tonight, but the Lord reminded me to rely fully on Him and to keep praising Him in the midst of the storm. And so I did. I sat there and I said, "Thank you, Lord, for the warm blankets that are covering my husband and keeping him warm. Thank you for this hospital and the people that are so wise to work here. Thank you for the doctors and their brains and their knowledge and how they're trying to figure him out. Thank you for the ambulance and getting us here safely in a blizzard. And thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you," as the clock just turned. And I don't know officially how long I did that. It seemed like hours, but it was crazy. Like, it gave me peace and joy. And it got me through that moment where I didn't feel anxiousness. I didn't feel worry. All I felt was thankfulness and joy and peace. And so those are the rhythms that I want to see us doing together. I know it's unnatural. God says, in the middle of the storm, look up, give thanks, and remember what God has done. So I hope that encourages you today.